In this live update, you are here to get some information on the new storm that is going to be on the way soon, with severe weather possible for some and snow for others in yet another round as an active march is set to continue. Stick around here as we go through the rest of this live update, whether you're watching it live with me or watching it after I'm done. Thank you very much for being here. All the details that you need to know on the next storm system that's going to be on the way as we go deeper into the upcoming weekend, and what you can expect out of that into next week as well. That is coming up, and we're going to start by pivoting right on over here to my Weather Bell model maps, and we're going to go ahead and give you a look at what is going to be happening about 15 to 20,000 feet on up into the atmosphere, because what happens with the pattern at this level of the atmosphere is what tends to dictate what happens down at the surface as we go through time. And you can see exactly what's been causing some storms, and at this point in time, now we're seeing some winds beginning to move off the east coast as we go through the night tonight, as this big dip in the jet stream, or trough that you're seeing right here indicated by these blues, that is all the way through many levels of the atmosphere, continues to dive on down. It's moving into an area that's been seeing ridging, warmer than average temperatures in the east, and that's why we've seen storms moving along with this trough. In fact, this is the exact culprit for that severe weather / tornado event we had in some parts of the Midwest back on Wednesday. Anyway, moving on from that current trough, that's going to move out. We'll get another little brief one behind it, but because there won't be as much of a ridge ahead of the next one, that's just going to help in reinforcing a little bit more cool air for some zones as we go into the weekend, not really influencing a huge storm system. What is going to make for our next storm system, though, is especially as we go out of Saturday into Sunday, as we start to see some oranges creeping up from the bottom of the screen, that indicates that our heights of the jet stream here are going to be a little bit higher. The jet stream is being pushed a little bit further north here into some parts of the south central United States and the southeastern United States as we go out of Saturday night into Sunday of next week, or of this upcoming weekend, I should say, and we're going to be having this trough kind of diving down towards it. You can see these indicated by these blue shades coming on down out of some parts of the north central plains. As we see that interaction, that's going to start some storms somewhere in the central United States as we come out of Saturday night and into Sunday, and we're going to continue to watch that particular storm system moving through the contrast zone. It's always the contrast zones between orange and blue where we tend to see these storm systems, and in this case, it's going to be sinking on down towards around the eastern coast of the United States by around our Monday, all the way back down to the Gulf Coast. We'll be watching some storms around that time as well. So that's something we're watching for around the early week time frame of next week. Let's go ahead and give you a general idea of how the storm is going to look with future radar guidance from the GFS ensemble members here, and we're going to go ahead and put it on this mode, and we should be good to play this out. Starting on out here through the near term, this storm, of course, has to make a landfall out in the western United States before it can move into points eastbound, and you can see that's exactly what we're going to be seeing as we go through the early part of the upcoming weekend, out of this upcoming Friday, which is tomorrow, and then into our Saturday, March 22nd of 2025, watching some rain and mountain snow in places like Washington. Same will be going on down here into some parts of Oregon. Same into Idaho. We'll see that happening in some parts of Montana, even on over here into parts of western Wyoming, watching some mountain snowfall as some cooler air moves in, as that dip in the jet stream, that trough, that piece of energy works through this region. This will certainly lead to some additional snowfall accumulations on top of what's already fallen all winter in some of those higher elevations, and then we'll start to see this system begin to move on out towards parts of the plains by the time we get towards the nighttime, Saturday night and into Sunday, and that's where, with low pressure beginning to make its way on out here into the north central plains, we could not only see a little bit of rain shower or storm activity through parts of South Dakota and Minnesota and Nebraska and Iowa as a result of that, as well as some snow in parts of North Dakota and northern Minnesota. We'll also have to watch this piece of energy on its south side a little bit closer to where you've got the ridge and the trough interacting. That's where we're going to have the best chance for severe weather late Saturday into Saturday night, and I'll show you in just a minute why these storms will have the potential to rotate, but why that won't necessarily mean that we're going to be looking at a big tornado threat. We'll talk a little bit more about that risk in a little bit, but just for overview standpoint, just know that as you exit parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and get into especially Missouri and northern Arkansas, at least a lower end severe weather threat looks possible for Saturday night, and then we start to see storms erupting more with more widespread convection generally being likely out of this particular system by the time it moves east through the day Sunday. You can also see as it does so, we're going to be watching some pretty hefty snowfall amounts likely moving out of parts of Minnesota into parts of Wisconsin and northern Michigan while we watch that possible line where I'll show you in just a minute we could even have a better chance for severe weather than we see Saturday night as we go through Sunday and Sunday night, stretching back down out of the Ohio Valley and then down here towards the south central plains along this cold front, as it's going to be sagging more in a north to south direction than a lot of the cold fronts recently have. This is not your extremely dynamic storm system like we've seen the last few times where they ride on up, move from the southwest to the northeast, drag this very vertically oriented cold front with them. This is more of a horizontally cold front. It's sagging down towards the south. It's not going to have as much of an intense cyclone, so to speak, a mid-latitude cyclone to work with, but nonetheless, damaging winds I think will especially be a threat out of a lot of these storms, both Saturday night and at this time into our Sunday and Sunday night. Some of those storms could continue down closer to the Gulf Coast where we could see a lingering threat even through the overnight hours of Sunday night into part of Monday, getting there towards parts of Louisiana, Mississippi. We've got Alabama and Georgia also having that threat. And all the way up and down from the Gulf Coast to Texas to Louisiana to Mississippi, all the way through the southeastern United States and then up to the mid-Atlantic, probably watching some rain and storminess. It's going to be a dreary day on Monday with some showers, storms, and maybe some breeziness moving through along with this system. Notice up there in the northeastern United States, we can zoom in on this zone a little bit better so that you can see this. It looks like in some of these spots we will have that potential based on this blended guidance on screen to start off with some snow at some time, but based on the favorable time stamp when the storm begins moving in. Notice this is Monday early morning in some parts of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, where we start off with some winter weather. But as the warmer air moves in ahead of the cold front with south to north winds, at least on its leading edge, that would turn a lot of this over to rain with maybe the exception of parts of Maine. So that's just one thing that I did want to quickly point out for those particular zones. But let's go ahead and zoom things back out so that you can see most guidance is indicating this front generally falling apart by the time we get towards our Thursday, or just moving off the East Coast and Gulf Coast in general, maybe all the way down to Florida, that we could be watching that potential for some continued storms, as we tend to see Florida being the last place to clear out from these larger scale systems that move across the United States. With that being said, I want to go ahead and jump back on over here now. And we're going to look at a custom graphic I've made. This is an overview of what I just covered for you. For this strong storm system that we're going to be watching from March 23rd to March 25th, you can see in the green, especially the dark green zones, that's where we have the best confidence in more scattered to widespread rain and the chance for some thunderstorms that are generally going to be more non-severe if you're not highlighted in the yellow shade. But where you do see that yellow shade, this zone being for especially around the Saturday and Saturday night time frame, and then this other zone which I'm going to highlight or circle in a darker and a more thicker pen. There you go. You can kind of see that secondary zone. That's going to be the one for around Sunday and Sunday night here from Texas and Louisiana, all the way back on up, stretching through parts of Arkansas, Mississippi, northern Alabama, north Georgia, and then back up into Tennessee and Kentucky. A lot of the East Coast will have that chance for storms into Monday. And then, of course, there is that wintry component where we're going to have the chance for a mix of rain and snow at times, anywhere from the Dakotas and Minnesota over to Wisconsin, Michigan, and then here into the northeast U.S. Keep in mind, the further north you go through that zone that says mix, the higher chance you'll be mixing and consistently seeing more snow over the amount of rain that you'll likely see, or freezing rain or sleet. Freezing rain and sleet mixing, and also kind of makes this a mix, so to speak. Now, I'll break down the severe weather in a little bit more detail now, and then we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what's going to happen in terms of the winter weather side of the storm system. And to talk more on the severe weather side, I do want to go on over to the good old-fashioned jet stream, because that's what I like to talk about here in these updates. And we're going to go ahead and pull that on screen here with the European ensemble guidance. This is some blended guidance indicating that we are going to have a fairly strong piece of jet stream energy moving out of parts of the west. You can see it there back over parts of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, stretching on out into Wyoming. That's going to be around Saturday midday. As it quickly ejects on out of the west, what do I always say? It's, if you're always with me here on these updates, I say the eastern and southeastern sides of the strongest pieces of energy is where you tend to get that best chance for severe weather at times. Moisture being pulled on up towards this piece of energy that's going to be in the central U.S., and that's going to lead to a zone right around Oklahoma, maybe up towards southeast Nebraska, but especially in points in between exiting Kansas into Missouri. Likely going to have the best chance for some at least isolated severe weather, maybe with some hail getting in the mix as well. That's going to be the main threat under this piece of jet stream energy as we go through Sunday early morning, as well as maybe through the late day Saturday before we get into that time frame. That's something we'll watch. Then you can see the jet stream energy kicks up more by the time we get towards our Sunday, and that's why all the way along that southeastern edge of this, we're going to have that potential for some severe weather. And the Storm Prediction Center has actually already been highlighting a lot of this zone for a few days now, especially the mid-south part of it, but now they've extended some of their highlights all the way on up into Kentucky and Tennessee. In fact, let me show that to you here. Here is what the Storm Prediction Center has highlighted for Sunday and Sunday night. Of course, I'll make my ONW severe scale graphic for this particular day as we get closer, but the Storm Prediction Center is already highlighting a 15% chance of severe weather within 25 miles of any given point, from Bowling Green in south central Kentucky back down through a lot of Tennessee, through parts of Georgia, a lot of Alabama, Mississippi, including Jackson, Yazoo City, Starkville, Tupelo, the south side, and up into Little Rock, Arkansas for now, all the way down into a lot of Louisiana, and then back on over to Dallas, Waco, and points eastbound there in Texas. A pretty broad zone looking at that highlight for that possibility of some severe weather, according to the experts, for Sunday and Sunday night. And again, that is going to be underneath that stronger piece of jet stream energy that's going to be moving on in. Let's go ahead and flip back on over to the model now, and I'm going to give you a look at CAPE. This is convective available potential energy, basically showing you the amount of storm fuel, if you want to call it that, that we're going to have moving on up in the atmosphere ahead of this particular storm. And you can see right there in the zone for that I talked about for Saturday and Saturday night into the early part of Sunday. And there you go with that area of energy moving on up. Again, if we're going to get any strong storms, it looks like this would be elevated supercell convection. The Storm Prediction Center themselves, they have said that. So exiting parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and then into some parts of Missouri and Arkansas. I'd be on the lookout for some possible hail producers, 1 to 2 inch hail being an isolated to maybe even scattered in threat, at least on this localized level within these 4 states. Again, around Saturday into Saturday night. I want to make that clear. That's going to be late Saturday, Saturday night into the early part of Sunday for that threat. That storm energy kind of dies off. We'll maybe see some isolated hail moving eastward closer to the Mississippi River, into the mid-Mississippi Valley zone by the time we get in towards the middle of the day Sunday, if any of those storms hold together. And then as we go deeper into the day, this European model guidance indicates that your best storm energy is going to be back into that Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi part of the 15% severe weather risk zone that the Storm Prediction Center has already highlighted. But we're going to have a stronger wind field in the atmosphere within this area that has some of this weaker instability into parts of the Ohio and Tennessee Valley region, including Kentucky and Tennessee, which is also highlighted in their yellow zone. So long story short, we've got a broad area that's going to be along this cold front that's, again, a little bit more horizontally oriented as opposed to vertically oriented in comparison to some of our more recent fronts, and that's going to make things a little bit interesting. Looking at the atmospheric profile in terms of the upper level winds, I don't see anything too impressive here with this wind field. This is your wind field not too far above your heads, just a few thousand feet above the surface here. And, you don't see anything extremely atrocious moving on through. You don't see any deep reds moving through. But what you do notice is there's definitely at least some wind energy in place around and ahead of when these storms would move in. And it's a little bit more south to north oriented as opposed to west to east like the jet stream. The mid to upper level jet stream. So if you've got at least some modest winds moving like this closer to the surface, and then you got winds kind of crossing those further up in the atmosphere, that could at least lead to a marginalized tornado threat, maybe even a scattered in tornado threat in a couple spots along that front. And that's something we'll have to pinpoint more in detail as we get closer to Sunday. So make sure you're turning those notifications on my channel so that you don't miss any of those future updates that I have as this setup does indeed get closer. That's all I have to talk about for the severe weather side of this storm. Now let's flip on over here looking at the European ensembles to talk in detail about some of the snowfall aspects. Then we'll talk about some of the temperatures. Then we'll talk in more detail about some of the stuff that anybody has questions on while we're here on the live chat. Moving on through, you can see as we go through the 24-hour increment from our Friday afternoon to the early part of our Saturday afternoon, parts of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, into western Montana, and then even on over here into the northern Utah, western Wyoming, and then western Colorado mountains. A lot of spots watching, generally at least a few inches of snow as you go on up in elevation, indicated by the blues. They're in the Cascades, and then especially the northern Idaho mountains. Better chance there for upwards of 6 to 12 inches just within that time period. Of course, there's a lot already on the ground in these zones anyway. This is not necessarily a significant snowstorm by those standards. From Saturday afternoon to Sunday afternoon, that's when we begin seeing snow picking on up out of especially North Dakota, and then here through parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, even parts of the Glove of Michigan. I think Detroit could get a little bit of snowfall accumulation before we turn over to maybe more of a mix or some rain at some point as we go through Sunday into the early part of Monday, but especially in this zone that I'm circling on up here through northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, the upper peninsula of Michigan. By the time we get a little bit closer to this event, I think we could definitely see some close to 6-inch snowfall totals being realized on this heavier snow cold side of this particular event. I know I've got Weatherman of the North in the chat. I've seen him down there in the live chat here, this live stream, and I know you're there in Wisconsin, so it looks like you might have some good weather for one of your little local chases for some of these snowfall conditions there. As we are looking at some of those conditions. I've also seen Weather Center Nazario in the chat. Thank you very much for tuning in tonight, Nazario. Moving on out of our, and to everybody else for that matter, Jordan, we've got Rain Maves and The Gaming. Thank you very much to everybody who is with me here live, or if you're tuning in after the stream. But you can see as we go through our late Monday, and then as we go through the Monday evening time frame, these ensembles picking up on some of that snow that could exit parts of Michigan, and then that 24-hour increment from around Monday early morning to Tuesday early morning, bringing out some snow totals here of at least a few inches in some parts of the interior Northeast. Pretty typical zones. You can definitely tell we're pushing towards the end of winter here. It seems like with each of these individual storms, unless we see another big anomaly upcoming that brings some much colder than average air on down with a huge trough, it continues to look like, in general, we're seeing the snow line shifting north as we tend to with these storms in the spring. This is very much like an October, November-like snow setup very far north in the far northern parts of the United States. Otherwise, not much wrapping around the system even, although we could see a little bit of snow further south in some parts of the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and interior Northeast, as some troughing or dipping of the jet stream looks like it will continue as we go into the time frame of next week. Let's talk a little bit about some of the temperatures that will go along with this setup as we go through the next several days. First of all, as we jump into tomorrow, our Friday, let me go ahead and pull up the layer where you can see the date there on the top left. There we go. Friday, March 21st to 2025. Going to be a pretty warm day for a lot of the country. As you can see, we're going to have numbers in the 60s and 70s expanding down here over a lot of the southern and central United States, from Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas all the way on over to the Mississippi Valley. A pretty warm day. Seeing some ridging, at least trying to build on up, although it is a little bit cooler as a result of that recent trough continuing into some parts of the east. Even the southeastern U.S., where we're going to be in the low 60s, could be a little bit warmer for this time of the year. Into Saturday, though, you can see some warmth continuing to develop out ahead of that system that's going to develop and move in to some of these zones in Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas. 60s and 70s Saturday afternoon before we could see that isolated severe threat into our Saturday night. And notice what's going on in the west around that time. These higher elevations back in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, not even really getting past 35 to 45 degrees, and that's because of that snow moving on through and that colder system. Look at this, by Saturday into Sunday, you can see a little bit cooler there over some parts of the north central U.S., and then you can see that troughiness even more here into some parts of the east, diving on down with only 40s for highs over a lot of the Great Lakes, Midwest, into the Northeast by the time we go towards our Monday, March 24th. But you can definitely tell it's spring, because the further south you go, the harder of a struggle it is for these temperatures to really cool down, even with some of these backdoor cold fronts. And look at this. We're going to be through the 70s and 80s and warming up even more with a strong ridge that's especially going to be impacting parts of the west, while the east has a little bit of that trough or that dip in the jet stream by the time we go closer towards the midweek time frame of next week. But with that being said, that's all I have to really cover for the main part of this weather update. For the 23 of you who are with me here in the live chat, or if you're watching this after, I'd love to get your input on a question that I have. Would anybody here who's watching now or is watching this after, in the future for video content on my channel, maybe some live streams as well, be interested in looking back at maybe some historical weather events? I kind of want to do something different to just not be one of those average weather videos here on YouTube, and I want to add some pizzazz, so to speak, to my channel at times. So who would be interested out of the now 30 people that are on here on this live chat? If you have any other questions, of course, drop those below as well. But I'd also love for you to answer my question, which is, would you be interested in me doing some analysis of past weather events, or something like that? I don't know exactly what it would be, but I would sometimes in my regular videos, or maybe even make some additional videos instead of the regular forecasts when things are quiet, and talk about some historical weather events, bring in some maybe other people who are interested in that kind of content as well, more of the historical aspect of weather, or how historical events were impacted by weather, something along those lines, that we would see if people would be interested in that. We have a few yeses in the chat. Jordan says, people call me a weather bug because I like the weather. Well, I mean, if you like the weather, then I'd say that's a compliment, right? But yeah, with that being said, Weatherman of the North, thank you for being a member, by the way. He says that would be awesome. I do appreciate that. Yeah, I'm going to definitely consider doing that more in some future updates here, as I want to kind of expand some outreach not only to people who are interested in the weather forecast at times, but also people who are more interested in just catching some information about historical weather events, and maybe how events in history as well were influenced by weather, stuff of that nature. So that's certainly something I'll be considering for future content. But I appreciate everybody tuning into tonight's live update. Share this out with family and friends who might be in any areas impacted by the future storms. And I will catch you right here in the next update.